The 1980s would prove to be a very important time in history for the Tampa Bay music scene. The Tampa Bay music scene simply exploded wide open in the early 1980s, ushering in the second golden age for the local music scene, which would peak around the mid-1980s through the mid-1990s. During this time, Tampa Bay became a huge hotbed of talent, comparable to the LA music scene around the same time. Leading the way throughout the 1980s were two rock bands, Stranger, formerly known as Lynx, and later Romeo, and Savatage, formerly known as Avatar. Both bands would eventually sign major label deals during the 1980s, Stranger signing with Epic/CBS Records in 1981, and Savatage signing with Atlantic Records in 1985. This would open the doors for other bands, both locally and nationally. During this time, bands were forming all over the Tampa Bay area, to the point where it started to seem like musicians were a dime a dozen. In addition, countless bands were relocating to the Tampa Bay area from other parts of the country, all in the hopes of having a better chance of getting discovered and signing with a major record label. Following the major label signings of both Stranger and Savatage earlier in the 1980s, two more Tampa Bay bands would also see major label deals in the late 80s and early 90s as well. Rock's Gang, who signed with Virgin Records, and the Hazies, formerly known as Rock, who signed with EMI. Other prominent Tampa Bay bands who made a name for themselves during the 1980s and early 1990s included the Macabre Brothers and Momentum, Four in Legion, Blade, Multicolor House, Bleeding Hearts, Erasmo, the Damon Fowler Group, Dolores Telescope, Freaks Rule, D-Force, Power Surge, Noise, and Men from Earth. Just to name a few. Bars and music venues started sprouting up all over, showcasing some of the best talent the Bay Area had to offer in all forms of music, but especially in rock music. It was usually standing room only, no matter what venue or which band you went to see. The clubs and venues were always packed. Venues such as the Rocket Club, ML Chasers, Alley Cats, Brass Mug, Killian's, Bourbon Street. They all were hugely popular, and showcased a lot of great original bands. During this time, the only cover bands you would find would be either some house band, or some lounge act playing at a local Holiday Inn somewhere. This area was rich with original bands. You couldn't go into a venue to listen to a local band that didn't play all, or at least mostly, original material. Most of the venues would only gig bands that were original. This area became so rich with original talent that under acts from all the major record companies started looking in our direction, heading down to the Bay Area, and scouting all the local live music bars and venues. Just drooling at the possible prospect of being the first to sign the next big band. Along with the A&R scouts coming down here from all the major record labels to tap the well of talent Tampa Bay had to offer, independent record companies started popping up all around the Bay Area as well. And the ones that were here already, all of a sudden had a much larger pool of talent to wade through. Some of the local independent record companies, just to name a few, that were prominent in the area include Blue Heart Records, BSB Records, Concrete Cargo Music, Deep Cut Records, and Little Leck Records. Along with the record companies and the saturation of bands came a demand for recording studios, and rehearsal space as well. New ones started popping up, and old ones started getting much more business than they ever could have hoped for before. Some of the local recording studios, just to name a few that were here, were Anything Audio, Atlas Recording Studios, Axiom Recorders, Baysound Recording, Morrisound Recording, Housequake Recording Studios, Labyrinth Studios, Infinity Studios, Panda Productions, and Slam Studios. Rehearsal studios were popping up as well, but couldn't keep up with the high demand. There was such a high demand for the limited rehearsal space that the air-conditioned storage units started advertising rehearsal space for bands in the media. Public storage, or PS for short, was one of the more popular ones that would actually advertise as rehearsal studios. Believe it or not. The local media started also writing editorials about the problem of bands using storage spaces to rehearse in that weren't air-conditioned. The news media was actually publishing public service announcements in the papers and on TV, warning about the dangers of practicing in a non-air-conditioned storage unit. Some of the more popular rehearsal studios were Apple Rehearsal Studios, Circle Rehearsal Studios, Northern Lights Studio 18, and Atlas Rehearsal Studios. Of course, with the explosion of the local music scene, came the need for talent management. Management was a necessary evil in most musicians' eyes, but in an area where original musicians and bands were a dime a dozen, they needed an edge. Local management companies were more than willing to fulfill those needs, and in return, scoop up the rewards. After all, back then there was no internet, which meant no MP3, no downloading of music, no MySpace or Facebook, no websites, period. There wasn't even public email yet. So self-promotion back then was extremely hard to pull off successfully, especially in an area that is bursting at the seams with other talent that was potentially your competition. In order to make it big, bands needed management and promotion. Not to mention that the bands had to work their asses off to get a following. With no internet back then to get the word out about your band and music, you had to pay your dues by using flyers and gigging as often, and at as many places, big or small, as you possibly could. Hiring a management agency would take some of the work and stress load off of the band, and was an outlet to get your name, and demos, in the hands of under-reps on the national music scene. Some of the local management agencies, just to name a few, that were in the area were Crystallize Management, Keith Collins Management, Capstone Music Group, and Steel Management. Tampa Bay became so much of a music-oriented area, that even other professions were trying to capitalize on it. Area music attorneys even started advertising on television and in print ads. Another outlet that was available to help the local music scene at the time was the organizations like the local branch of the Afofan Musicians Union, American Federation of Musicians, and the Florida Musicians Association. The support for the local music scene and the bands in general from the print media, radio stations and the record stores was phenomenal. Most of the record stores at the time had separate sections in their stores that were reserved for selling albums solely released by unsigned local artists. Record stores like Specs Music and Video, Peaches Music and Video, Bananas Records and Tapes, Aces Records, Vinyl Fever, Vinyl Museum, and Asylum Records and Tapes all were great supporters, and featured local artists and bands in all their stores. The local instrument stores were doing their part in helping all the great talent as well. Seminole Music and Sound, Paragon Music, Brigham Music, Music Mart, and Thorogood Music all played a huge part. Many of these stores would constantly feature on-site performances by the local bands. Bleeding Hearts would perform on several occasions at both locations of Seminole Music and Sound, and would pack huge crowds each time. Record stores and instrument stores weren't the only great supporters of the local bands either, the scene was being highly promoted on the airwaves as well. Unlike most other parts of Florida, Tampa Bay was one of the only areas where local radio stations were setting aside pockets of precious airtime in order to showcase our great talent in the form of an hour or so of playing nothing but songs from local artists. These stations would also broadcast in-studio interviews and performances with local artists and bands as well. WXDB 98 Rock had their Tampa Bay Rocks show hosted by Jeff Zinder from 9 p.m. midnight on Sunday nights. WMNF 88.5 FM had their local music show hosted by Ron Boyka on Thursday nights from 11 p.m. midnight. 95 Inf also did their part in promoting the local music scene as well, airing the 95 Inf Radio Clash every Sunday night from 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. Hosted by Charlie Logan, the 95 Inf Radio Clash broadcasted local bands performing live from Morrisound recording studios in Tampa. The radio dial wasn't the only place you could find Bay Area talent showcased. TV was lending a helpful hand as well. There were several cable access shows that were dedicated to showcasing local bands and clubs. Tracks hosted by Kathy Lucas, Tampa Bay Players Live, Metal Masters, and Dave's Garage. Hosted by Kathy Lucas, Tracks was a weekly cable TV show that focused mainly on the local music scene. On her show, Kathy would interview local bands and artists, play music videos by local bands and artists, and report on the local music scene news. Dave's Garage was a cross between The Tonight Show and Wayne's World. Dave's Garage would feature local bands performing in the studio, as well as conduct interviews with the local talent. Probably the longest lasting, and more popular of the TV shows was The Mike Pacelli Show. This show was hosted by local Tampa Bay musician, Mike Pacelli, who fronted the band, the Mike Pacelli Group. The TV show aired in the 80s and 90s. Pacelli hosted his television show on the Warner Brothers affiliate WTMV for 10 years on Friday and Saturday nights in the Tampa/St. Petersburg/Orlando market. The program boasted a 14 million cumulative audience. Mike would often have guest musicians from the local Tampa Bay area, as well as national artists, jamming on the show in between skits, interviews, and showing music videos. It wasn't just the local music television shows that was shining the spotlight on the Tampa Bay music scene. We were getting attention on a national and global level as well. Savatage was featured, and even hosted MTV's Headbangers Ball on several occasions. In addition, the Tampa Bay Metal Awards received recognition on MTV as well. The publicity didn't end with just the radio stations, TV stations, or record stores either. The print media was covering the Bay Area as well, in the form of both fan and trade magazines. Tampa Bay had plenty of print media coverage in locally published magazines such as Thrust Magazine, Players Magazine, Focus Magazine, Jam Magazine, and Creative Loafing. Creative Loafing, which is still in existence today, was more of an eclectic, alternative newspaper itself. They featured more than just the local music scene in their newspaper, however, they did their fair share of covering the local music scene. The other 4 magazines were purely dedicated to the local music scene, complete with editorials, interviews, show schedules, band press releases, album reviews, and musician classifieds. The local music scene became so huge that even the bi-weekly, 100-page Jam magazine wasn't enough, so once a year the publisher of Jam magazine would publish a special edition magazine called the Florida Music Directory. This special edition of the magazine was a nearly 200-page, who's who in the local music business. It was by all practicality, a trade magazine that offered descriptions and contact information of everyone in the Tampa Bay music industry. It listed not only the local bands and artists, but also contract songwriters, promoters, agents/managers, radio stations, music attorneys, sound/lighting, transportation, venues, video production, media, record companies, distribution, recording/rehearsal studios, and much, much more. Tampa Bay played host to several large-scale events during this time as well. 98 Rock started the popular, annual multi-day event and concert known as Livestock back in 1990 to showcase both national and local bands. Tampa Bay also had several annual awards shows to honor all the local music scene professionals as well. The 3 more well-known ones were the Bay Area Music Awards, Tampa Bay Music Awards, and the Tampa Bay Metal Awards. As the mid-1990s were coming to a close, and with the late 1990s just on the horizon, it seemed like nothing would slow down the music scene here in Tampa Bay. Also during this period of the 1980s and 1990s, a new genre of heavy metal music took shape and became hugely popular in the Tampa Bay area as well. Death metal. Much like the mainstream rock bands that were popular in the Tampa Bay area. The death metal bands were becoming extremely popular on the local music scene as well. Whether it was from the common, everyday, average garage bands that were sprouting up all over the Bay Area, or the more experienced bands playing in the local venues such as the Brass Mug or the Ritz Theatre, Tampa Bay was gaining some well-deserved attention and recognition with this newer, much more aggressive sound. Tampa Bay was producing the majority of metal bands. Bands such as Obituary, Death, Morbid Angel, Nasty Savage and Deicide, just to name a few, were all from this area. Cannibal Corpse, although originally from New York, moved their home base to the Tampa Bay area so they could prosper from the locally exploding death metal scene as well. Before long, record companies started signing Tampa Bay death metal bands to their labels left and right. Morrisound Recording Studios in Tampa became one of the preferred studios in the Bay Area for death metal bands to record in. Though the studios did much more than just death metal, it was death metal that helped put the studios, as well as the Tampa Bay area, on the national map in the 1980s and into the 1990s. So much in fact that it rightfully earned Tampa Bay the moniker of the death metal capital of the world. That moniker couldn't have been more accurate at the time either. LA was home to the hair bands, Seattle would eventually become known as the birthplace of grunge, and without a doubt, Tampa Bay was then, and always will be, the death metal capital of the world. Even with the Tampa Bay death metal scene having an extremely large following, many in the scene at the time felt that it was being shunned by the mainstream rock scene here in the Tampa Bay area. Though Tampa Bay was receiving worldwide recognition for being the death metal capital of the world, here in Tampa Bay the death metal scene was being looked upon as more underground. It was even reported that the reason Keith Collins, Sabotage, Crunch, founded the annual Tampa Bay Metal Awards back in 1990 was due to what he felt was the lack of attention and recognition that the death metal bands were receiving at the annual Tampa Bay Music Awards show. TampaBayMusicHistory.com